out of all the studios in the world, the one I would always rank above all the rest is always Pixar. They've made good movies, they made average movies, and they've made really great movies. And we are going to talk about them all today. So I'm calling this video The Rise, Fall, and Rise of Pixar. That title does sound silly, but I'm going to go to how Pixar had a great beginning, how they kind of dropped in quality, and how they got their great quality of film back. So before we get started, please like and subscribe. Comment down below what you thought of this video, and warning, it is going to be a pretty long video. So I'm just warning you guys. But today, and I've loved these movies since I was a kid, and they've always stuck with me. They're funny. They're heartfelt. They're emotional. They're beautifully animated. Pixar's literally like a perfect company, or are they? Because I'm going to be talking about the rise, the fall, and the rise of Pixar. Let's get started with the movie that started it all, Toy Story. Toy Story was the movie that not just set it off for Pixar movies, but that set it off for 3D animation. It was directed by John Lasseter and had pretty impressive animation for its time. It can look a little bit dated, but that's like one con, but it does have spectacular animation, great chemistry between the main characters, great side characters. Sid was a great villain in my opinion. I like the voice acting, I like the writing and the humor. In my opinion, it's kind of one of their least emotional movies, in my opinion. And I thought the sequels were a little bit more emotional as they went along, but that doesn't stop me from absolutely loving Toy Story. And the human characters were great. They weren't forgettable. I liked the dog, even though the dog does look a little bit dated, and so do the humans, but that's okay. But the toys, the designs of the toys still really do hold up. They don't look dated or like ugly. They do well. I can't imagine that a movie from 1995 looks better than an animated movie from 2017. I'm talking about the Emoji Movie. A movie from 1990. But now let's get started with Bug's Life. A Bug's Life is a good movie, but it never really reached the heights of Toy Story. The animation looks very dated, and the characters are not really memorable. They're likable, but they're not really memorable. Hopper, I think, is a alright villain. I mean, he's not one of the best. And Flick is not one of their memorable protagonists. This is a movie. This is probably the dullest of the Pixar worlds that they've created, in my opinion. But I still kind of do like this movie. I definitely think it is one of their weaker movies, but I still really do like this movie. The same year Ants came out, and Mulan, and Prince of Egypt. 1998 was a pretty good year for animation because we had A Bug's Life, we had Ants, we had Mulan, we had Prince of Egypt. I didn't think Bug's Life exactly reached the heights of Mulan or Prince of Egypt, but I did slightly like it more than Ants, which tried to rip it off. But when you saw the other ripoff, Ants Life, I think, you find a whole new appreciation for the DreamWorks movie, and even more of an appreciation for this movie. I don't think it's Pixar's cream of the crop or anything. Definitely not Toy Story level, but it is pretty good. Speaking of Toy Story, let's move on to Toy Story 2. Toy Story 2 was a very great sequel. It had great animation. They've kind of developed the animation quite a lot during this time period. And Woody and Buzz are as great as they were in the first movie. We also got new introductions to other characters like Jessie and Bullseye and Stinky Pete and Zurg and Mrs. Potato Head. So this movie introduced us to a lot of new characters. A sequel will usually always introduce you to new characters, obviously. But I thought Stinky Pete was a great twist villain. This was Pixar's first twist villain. And it was definitely a really great one, in my opinion. And the human characters were as great as they were in the first Toy Story. I don't think this one's probably my least favorite Toy Story movie. They're all, like, great movies. Like, they're all, like, 10 out of 10, perfect. But this is probably the one I enjoy the least out of all four of them. But that doesn't drop the quality of how amazing this sequel is. Pixar's first sequel, by the way. But they didn't make a lot of sequels. It was a lot. Back in this like time period, they were doing more original ideas than sequels. But this movie was really great. Our next movie is Monsters, Inc. Our first movie, one directed by Pete Docter, who is, in my opinion, my favorite Pixar director. You'll see why when we get to you'll see why later. But Monsters, Inc. is definitely a great movie. They develop fur, like the design of fur, like really, really quickly from 1995 all the way to now. The amount of detail in Monsters, Inc.'s animation is just spectacular. I loved Sully and Mike, and even Boo as characters. I like Waternoose as a villain, and Randall Boggs. This had a different twist villain, because there was a villain from the start. Well, that was kind of the same thing with Toy Story 2, but here there was a villain from the start, Randall Boggs, and then there was a twist villain, Waternoose. But this movie had very likable characters, amazing animation, great writing, great humor. Everything about this movie was great. So Pixar was had perfect movies at this time period. Really great movies. And also Waternoose is a pretty scary villain. And you guys probably know what I'm talking about. His famous line, and spoilers if you haven't seen Monsters, Inc., by the way. His line when he says, "I kidnapped 1,000 children before I let this company die." But now let's get to Finding Nemo. Finding Nemo was a beautiful looking animated film. Had great animation underwater. And I liked the story of it. It was a father trying to find his son. I liked Dory as a comic relief. This Pixar movie didn't really have a villain. And sometimes I like when movies do that. But sometimes I like when movies don't have villains, and there's an internal conflict. Like this movie. Sometimes if there's not an internal conflict, but there's also not a villain, I feel like a movie could be a little bit incomplete. But this movie was beautiful. It had beautiful animation underwater and stuff. They developed animation quickly it was nearly 10 years since Toy Story, so that's great. And I loved Marlin and Dory and Nemo and the Fish Gang. I also like Darla. Isn't that really? She tortures fish, but whatever. She tortures fish, but I still liked her character a little bit. Actually, no, I didn't really. But she is a kid, and kids need to learn stuff. I don't think I would consider her the villain. I would more consider the dentist the villain. But speaking of villains, great villains, The Incredibles, our first Pixar movie directed by Brad Bird, had a great villain with Syndrome, one of my favorite Pixar villains of all time. And Syndrome, I feel like, is the king of twist villains, in my opinion. It had great animation, and it had great action. And this was Pixar's first PG movie. Their first movie to be rated PG. Well, I understand, because it's a superhero movie. There's going to be violence. It's going to be scary and stuff. And I liked Syndrome because he's revealed to be evil halfway through, instead of in the last third, like Disney movies like Frozen and Big Hero 6 and well, not really Big Hero 6, but Frozen and Zootopia would reveal their villains to be evil, like, in the last third. And that doesn't really give them enough time to be villains, right? Syndrome, on the other hand, is revealed to be evil halfway through the movie, and that gives him enough time to be evil. And I love this movie is really about family. It's not about, like, superheroes trying to fight a bad guy. Well, it is, but it's mainly about family. And also, I love Jack. Jack's, like, one of the best Pixar characters ever. I also like Dash and Violet and Edna and Frozen. Samuel Jackson's a great actor. But now let's get to Cars. Cars, it had good animation and decent, like, characters. But I did have a few issues with this movie, and it is not a masterpiece like the other movies I mentioned. Chick Hicks is not really a memorable villain. Michael Keaton's a good actor, but I don't really think he's a memorable villain. Lightning McQueen and Mater, I didn't really like them that much. I felt like the best characters in the movie were the characters surrounding them. And I feel like the best character in your animated movie should always be your lead character, but that's not the case here. I feel like the best character in this movie is Doc Hudson, and he teaches him how to race and stuff. I like how this one's actually about racing instead of a movie that we'll talk about later on. So it does have a pretty decent plot. Well, it doesn't have an amazing plot, but it has a decent plot. It has the right characters. I mean, I didn't know. It's surprising that my two least favorite characters in the movie were Mater and Lightning McQueen. That's, like, kind of surprising. And the lead character should always be the best character in the movie, in my opinion. And not that they are, but they should be. It shouldn't be my favorite character are the other characters surrounding our main characters. But Cars was a pretty good movie, for example. But we got even better in 2007 when Brad Bird released Ratatouille. This movie was released the year I was born. Not the day I was born, like the end of 2007, so Ratatouille was already, like, out on DVD, but this was the year I was born, by the way. Ratatouille had spectacular animation, and it had great, like, voice acting I had great characters like Remy and Chef Skinner and Gusto and Linguini and Colette, and Anton Ego. And this movie actually has pretty, like, decent, like, voice actors. It has Patton Oswalt, it has Brad Garrett, it has Ian Holm, rest in peace. I forgot who played Linguini. I don't remember his voice actor, but this movie was a great, creative movie. I didn't really think it was as good as The Incredibles, but it was a pretty good movie. I think Chef Skinner is not really a memorable villain, but he is a good villain. And I don't want to shame Ian Holm too much because he just passed away, but So Ratatouille is named after food, and it's named Ratatouille because the main character is Rat. Just little fun facts. And also, I thought it had a great story and everything. But now, a year later, we got WALL-E. Yep, WALL-E. Something that's underappreciated in animated movies is the power of silence. And unlike Walking with Dinosaurs, when the characters never shut up, these characters are silent. I loved WALL-E and Eve as characters. I don't really think this movie had memorable human characters, and Otto is not a memorable villain. This movie didn't really need a villain. That's one of the cons. It doesn't really need a villain, in my opinion. But it had beautiful animation. And it had, like, stellar, like, I think this movie's a little bit better than Ratatouille, but I still like both of these movies. Excuse me. And also, the design of WALL-E is one of the most iconic Pixar designs, in my opinion. And I don't think this movie is as good as Finding Nemo, which is Andrew Stanton's previous movie, but I do like this movie quite a bit. And I felt like it was just great. It had, like, great Like, it was silent. It didn't have a lot of speaking. I'm like walking with dinosaurs, and it was just a perfect movie. I'm probably opinion, but I think it's better than Kung Fu Panda. Sorry. And then we get to Up. Up is directed by Pete Docter, and is the movie I consider the most underrated Pixar movie of all time. Unpopular opinion, but I enjoyed this movie more than The Incredibles. I loved Up. I liked Carl Fredricksen. I liked Russell was a little bit annoying. That's one of the cons. Russell was a little annoying. But I liked Doug and Kevin. I didn't really think this movie really needed a villain, but there's not a lot of characters, so you would think that Muntz had to be the villain. The first 15 minutes is some of the best scenes ever put on in cinema, and I think this might have the best score out of any Pixar movie, especially because of the song that goes like this. That's the reason alone why, in my opinion, this is the best Pixar score. Or Michael Giacchino is probably my favorite Pixar composer, and this is his best work to date. I mean, I think he does a better job with his animated movies instead of his live action movies, but he is a pretty great composer. And I love this movie. I liked the plot. And it was really sad and emotional and everything. It had humor. Every element you would need in a Pixar film. So every single Pixar movie up to... But now we have Toy Story 3. The only two, sequels during this time period were Toy Story 2 and Toy Story 3. Toy Story 3, I think they outdone themselves also with the franchise, with spectacular animation. And they designed humans perfectly, really quickly. It had great villain with Lotso, great character, the greatest characters in cinema history. The greatest Pixar characters were Woody and Buzz, in my opinion. But I love their characters. I liked Bonnie's toys and the ending. Don't get me started on the ending. It was so emotional and everything. I liked Bonnie's toys. I liked the toys that were at the daycare. I liked Barbie and Ken and all the other toys and stuff. So I think this movie's better than Toy Story 2. Not as good as the first movie, but I think it's better than Toy Story 2. And Lotso remains my favorite Pixar villain, and so he's revealed to be evil halfway through, like Syndrome, and we try to root for him at the end, but then he completely betrays them, makes them burn to death, almost burned to death. That's when he's like, spoilers, where's your kid now, Sheriff? Well, Pixar was perfect at this time, up until they released Cars 2. Cars 2, unpopular opinion, is not a bad movie. It's just an average little spy movie, in my opinion. The magic about Cars, in my opinion, was racing. This movie has cool racing scenes, I'll give it that. It does have cool racing scenes, and the animation does still look top-notch. But the issue is, despite having racing scenes, there's not a lot of racing. I mean, a lot of racing. It's mainly a spy movie. I think Miles Axelrod is probably the worst Pixar villain to date. He's not really memorable. Mater is not really a good Pixar protagonist. I think he's a little annoying. I think this movie's 6 out of 10 probably, but this movie isn't bad. I think it's just a little average, and it does have a lot of issues. Lightning McQueen is buried, and he's barely in it. The racing, but I think despite having weak main characters and having a weak plot, I do feel like it does get saved from being a total disaster with Michael Caine as Finn the Missile. And I think the animation is nice to look at, and it does have pretty enjoyable racing sequences. But I do think this is surprisingly, this is Pixar's weakest movie. And then they didn't get any better because they released Brave a year after. It wasn't as I thought this movie was kind of average. Excuse me, sorry. And I feel like the wrong company is making this movie. This feels like a DreamWorks movie or just a regular Disney movie, not a Pixar movie. I think Wreck-It Ralph should have been Pixar, and this should have been Disney, but... So, yeah, it's Disney Princess. Merida's one of the weaker Pixar protagonists. Wreck-It Ralph, and a one animated feature, Wreck-It Ralph easily should have won that one. What are some pros? And it's like basically Brother Bear, but Pixar. But the pros, the animation is nice to look at, and I guess the archery scene is cool, but otherwise, I would personally, you can watch this one, but it's not the cream of the crop for Pixar. Our Pixar is at kind of a weird place at this time. They had like masterpieces, but after Toy Story 3, they kind of went on a downward spiral. I do like Brave, though. I think I would take Brave over the next movie we're going to mention any day, but it's not the cream of the crop. And I definitely I wouldn't skip it, but you could watch it once. Next, Monsters University, Dan Scanlon's movie. This is a Monsters, Inc. prequel, not a sequel. It's a prequel. And a pretty average one. It had good animation. I mean, and the characters were still kind of enjoyable, but the story was kind of predictable and stuff. And the new characters were, and I didn't really like the new characters that much. The best characters are still the characters from the original. And I didn't really think the new characters were particularly great. Pixar was kind of at a weird place at this time. This is and they had a serious case of sequel-itis, or average-itis, I guess. That's because all these 3 movies are average. And that's probably why I wasn't really too excited for Onward, because Onward was directed by Dan Scanlon. Dan Scanlon directed this movie. That was one of the reasons why I wasn't too excited for Onward, but we'll talk about Onward later on, so stay tuned. But I didn't really think this was the cream of the crop, but it definitely wasn't bad. I did like those scare game sequences. I thought those were really great. And it is a pretty entertaining movie, but it would have been better if this and Cars 2 were direct-to-video sequels instead of theatrical release sequels. But they were at a weird place at this time. But Pixar finally made a great movie again with Inside Out. Inside Out, I think, is probably my favorite Pixar movie. It was just amazing. Beautiful animation, great characters, and great story. I didn't really think so. I liked Riley as a character. She's relatable little 11-year-old girl and these emotions are controlling her. And this movie didn't have a villain, but it didn't need to have a villain. The conflict was mainly between 2 different emotions, joy and sadness, going on a little adventure together. And I think this is probably my favorite, some of the best animation put out by the studio. I don't think the magic from the animation comes from the character designs, but the character designs look great. I think the magic is the backgrounds. Not in the real world, but in the, my abstract world. Well, they had, great, locations. Headquarters looked amazing. Long-term memory looked great. And also Dream Productions and Subconscious and the Memory Dome. But the magic of the backgrounds comes from Imagination Land. Very creative. Out of the box. It doesn't rip off other animated movies. This is one of the most original animated movies ever. And this, well, it's Pete Doctored. No surprise it was good. But what's the point? Because the next one, they would release The Good Dinosaur. Despite it being a little bit underrated, I do think it is a really good movie with great animation. Even though, and an alright plot, not a great plot, but an alright plot. It was pretty predictable. It kind of drags a little bit, and the cartoony character designs and the realistic backgrounds didn't really blend together for me. And the villains weren't that memorable. This one lacks the hilarious, this lacks the humor of a Pixar movie, and I love funny Pixar movies. It has weak protagonist, in my opinion. I didn't really like Arlo that much. He is alright, but he's not like Woody or Buzz or anything like that. This movie was in development hell, literally. It went through a lot of delays. They had to like swap out directors, and that's probably why it ended up bombing at the box office. Yep, it was the lowest grossing Pixar movie at the time, and it flopped. Not because it was a bad movie, but I feel like one of the main reasons was like I said, it was in development hell. So that's probably why it flopped. They swapped out directors and stuff. I already said this, but I can say it again. But Finding Dory is an alright sequel, in my opinion. I liked the sequel. It had great animation, great characters, and everything. And I liked Dory in this movie, but this movie, but the cons come from the story being too similar to first, and it basically like had and Nemo and Marlin have nothing to do. Like they don't have a huge role in this one, and despite them having a lot of time to shine in Finding Nemo. So yeah, this movie is mainly about Dory. So I feel like if you're not named Dory, you don't have a huge role. But I do think this is a pretty enjoyable sequel. In my opinion, it's definitely better than the other three that I mentioned when we were talking about the fall of Pixar. But this isn't a case of like sequelitis or anything like that. Not like Cars 2 or Monsters University. I just feel like this is a B movie sequel. Well, it's not great, but I do think it is very good. I think, unpopular opinion, but I think Kung Fu Panda 3 was a little bit better. I do like the voice acting, and the animation is very strong. And the cons are basically just nitpicks. This one also didn't really have a villain, but it didn't really need to have one. But after that, they would release another sequel, Cars 3. The reason why I think they're releasing more sequels now is because they didn't have a huge success with Good Dinosaurs, so they were probably like, yeah, we're probably going to make more money if we just do sequels, Cars 3, it is alright. I mean, it's alright. I mean, the villain is not that great, but they shifted the focus back to what Cars is supposed to be about. That is racing. It has stellar racing sequences, especially the Florida Speedway scene at the end. Lightning McQueen is a little bit of a better character in this one. I did enjoy him more than I did in the previous two. Mater has nothing to do, so they were like, it didn't really work to have him as a main character, so let's just have him do nothing. And it has pretty good animation. I liked the demolition derby sequence. That's where they're like in the mud and everything. And I thought that sequence was really like well done. And I think they kind of outdone themselves with the racing scenes in this movie. I liked Cruz Ramirez as a new character, but I didn't really like Jackson Storm or Sterling that much. I don't really think they were that memorable. Also, that drags Cars 3 back a little bit, but it is a huge improvement over Cars 2. But then they do more original projects with Coco, hoping that they will not bomb that movie. And it turns out this movie is amazing. It's my second favorite Pixar movie behind Inside Out. Beautiful animation, the best animation they've ever put out, in my opinion. I liked all the characters, especially Hector and Miguel and Dante. It had a great villain with Ernesto del Cruz. It didn't really need a villain, but he is a really decent villain. It was like same thing with Inside Out, where it's like the realistic real world had more realistic animation, and the like skeleton world was more cartoony. A lot of people were bothered that the skeletons had eyes, but it didn't bother me really. And it didn't really bother me that much because they wanted to have a more playful look. If they didn't have eyes, it would just be like hard R-rated, probably because they were creepy and everything. And so I understand why they would choose eyeballs, and it doesn't bother me personally. I think it works. And another sequel Incredibles 2. This has to be the most underrated movie sequel of all time. Everyone gives this movie so much hate. Well, not hate, but they were like, this movie's painfully average. I liked it. I liked it a lot. Not as good as Spider-Verse. And I do think it is a really good movie. Beautiful, great animation. Screenslaver, I do not think is as great as Syndrome. I definitely like Syndrome more. But I do like Evelyn Dever a lot as a villain. The prologue, I love the action is better than ever. I did like the prologue sequence and everything like that. And I liked all the superheroes that they introduced, like Void and Brick and Helix. I thought they were really cool characters. And the train sequence I liked a lot. And the sequence when they had to save the ambassador was really cool. And the final battle was also amazing. So great action, a decent villain, and characters that you were glad got returned. My favorite part of the movie, though, spoilers, has to be Jack versus the raccoon. That scene was really enjoyable for me. And I love Jack. But Toy Story 4, a sequel that we did not need at all. I thought it looked pretty good, and it was better than anyone would ever imagine. Beautiful animation. Characters are better than ever. Really great new additions like Forky, Ducky, and Bunny, Bo Peep. Bo Peep's not a new character, but she never got this much recognition. And Bo Peep's the best in this movie. And Keanu Reeves as Duke Kaboom is also a great character. Also like Gabby as a villain. And there could be an argument that the other toys had nothing to do. But that's really what. But it didn't really bother me. I think this movie is absolutely perfect, and one of the best movie sequels. Everyone gives this sequel flack too. But I thought this movie was more than great. I think I enjoyed it a little bit more than Toy Story 2, but it's probably like number 3 in my Toy Story ranking, behind Toy Story 3 and Toy Story, and above Toy Story 2. And the ending scene, oh my god, the ending scene. And I haven't cried more than a movie before. But they were back to doing originals with Onward. I didn't get to see this movie in theaters, unfortunately. I watched it on Disney Plus, and it was great. Really great animation, great voice acting and humor. Barley was a little bit annoying for me in the beginning, but he definitely grew as a character. It was basically Indiana Jones for Pixar. It looks like a DreamWorks movie a little bit. It does, but at the end of the day, it is a Pixar movie. The ending was amazing. I'm so sad that this movie bombed at the box office. I think this is their lowest grossing movie to date. I think Onward is their lowest grossing to date. Even lower grossing than Onward. This should be 2 reasons. 1, because no one thought it looked very good. And 2, probably because of coronavirus. This was like one of the few last movies to come out before theaters shut down. But this movie was great. I think Pixar will probably outdo themselves, though, in November by releasing my most anticipated movie in a long time, Soul. This looks like, just by the trailer, this movie just looks amazing. And great. This is their best animation to date. Best animation ever. Really realistic in the real world. The cartoony world looks super vibrant and everything. Love that animation. And I can't wait to see what Pixar has next. So that is the rise, fall, and rise of Pixar. And thanks so much for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe and turn on notifications. And I'll see you guys next time. And so, to infinity and beyond. Bye, guys. And remember, Pixar will always live in our hearts forever. Even 39 years from now, Pixar will still be making movies and everything. So, to infinity and beyond. See you guys next time. And bye. Tell me what you thought of this video down below.